blocks away! Look, I really wanted to like Scoob. I mean it, I really did. I saw the concept art, I saw the trailer, I was really excited for this movie. I'm a huge Scooby Doo fan, and if I'm being honest, I feel like we're living in a golden age of Scooby Doo content. Whether it be Mystery Inc., or even as far back in the early 2000s as the live-action Scooby Doo movies. I personally grew up watching What's New Scooby Doo, and I absolutely love that show. So I was definitely on board for an animated theatrical Scooby Doo film. The problem is, I didn't get one. Okay, I'm gonna take a second here to just cover my tracks a little. This was a film made by a lot of people who worked extremely hard. Obviously, the movie theater industry is in a tough spot right now, and it wasn't able to come out in theaters. I really feel bad for them in that aspect. And there was obviously a lot of passion and effort put into this movie, okay? No bad blood to the people that made it. But that being said, there are a lot of flaws with this movie, and I feel like as a Scooby Doo fan, I was very disappointed. So let's talk about why. The biggest problem, the most glaring issue with this movie, in my opinion, is that Scoob is not a Scooby Doo story. Scooby Doo stories are pretty simple, okay? It's not rocket science. There's a supernatural mystery, typically an elusive individual causing trouble, and Mystery Inc. is brought in to uncover the mystery and save the day, learning about different walks of life along the way. Very wholesome. The characters also tend to go through internal and external conflicts where they feel like they have to prove themselves and even someone's innocence. They're complicated weaving narratives. They're great mystery stories. That's why they're so popular. Yeah, you can say that Scooby-Doo is predictable or that it has a very specific story structure that it sticks to, and I say great, because it's obvious that this story structure has been bent and changed throughout the years. If anything, it's kind of this incredible blueprint to tell great mystery stories. And if shows like Mystery Inc. are representative of anything, you can mess with the script and change it around while keeping the core elements and still tell an incredible, interesting, and original story. So what was this then? Literally, like, you had the blueprint for the perfect story, and you didn't hit on any of the points. Let me explain. The gang is split up for the majority of this film, and not in the way that you would expect, where there's a mystery to solve, so they split up to look for clues. It's almost like there's like a super famous line that's uttered in every Scooby-Doo rendition that's not said in this movie once. Instead, Shaggy and Scooby are forced away from their friends, and it's not really interesting since they're with characters we don't care about. Blue Falcon, Dino Mud, and Dee Dee. They make no real effort to have us connect with these characters either. They kind of just show up like we're expected to know who they are. And as a casual viewer who wanted to like this movie, I didn't like any of these characters. They didn't give me a reason to. Dee Dee is like the blandest one. Like, I don't know what her story is. Does she just help out? Dynamite's annoying and complains the whole time. They made a grave error because half of this movie's cast are people that you are not invested in. At least from my perspective. I don't know. Everyone watched this movie differently, I'm sure. Everyone else, and by everybody else, I mean 3/5 of the most important cast in cartoon history, are relegated to a B-plot that tries to just regurgitate Mystery Incorporated, with Scooby being some reincarnation of a space god or whatever. It's kind of glossed over, and for this to be the mystery of the movie is extremely disappointing. Scooby-Doo movies are centered around a mystery, not a superhero fight. I don't understand. I'm angry and I'm sad. It's okay to tell a non-traditional Scooby-Doo story in a Scooby-Doo property, okay? We've seen it done before. It's great. If anything, the live-action movies did this perfectly, and they subverted expectations for what a lot of Scooby-Doo fans thought they could see. That's the key word. You can subvert expectations without completely destroying the entire skeleton from which your story is built upon. And Scooby-Doo is one of the most famous skeletons in all of story writing. That works as a pun for story structure, and also because skeletons are spooky and they deal with spooky stuff. The bottom line is, splitting up characters in a Scooby-Doo film makes sense when you give them a reason to split up. Mystery Inc. very rarely, if not ever, gets separated because of things outside of their control. So the majority of this movie is built off of something that's already very aggravating to watch as a Scooby-Doo fan. If you want them to be separated, you have a clear way to separate them. There's a literal line that everybody has access to when writing a Scooby-Doo story that they could have used at any point and they didn't.
Let's split up and look for clues.
Another thing Scoob dropped the ball on, something that I mentioned before briefly, there was no real mystery, and this part is crucial. The mystery boiled down to half the cast finding out that Scoob was a descendant of some famous dog. That was it. There wasn't a single second this entire movie where I was like, is that the bad guy? Is that the bad guy? No, this was the bad guy, and he sucked, and he was the bad guy the whole time. I'll touch on him later, okay? I have a lot to say about this man. Scooby-Doo stories are mystery stories, and they follow the story structure of a mystery story. Maybe there's a final confrontation, there usually is some big climax to the story, but it felt so weird that this movie opted instead to have a final fight scene. It's so far removed from anything Scooby-Doo, it's actually laughable. There was a part at the very end when they captured Duke and they unmasked him, but it made zero sense, and it had Simon Cowell, who I will touch on in a second because he made me very mad. But this scene proved how far off from Scooby-Doo they got because they tried so hard at the last minute to shoehorn in this unmasking scene. Because they knew if they had a Scooby-Doo movie without an unmasking scene, there would be riots in the street. But instead, they just did it in the laziest way. They made a joke out of it. It was dumb. You can't make a Scooby-Doo movie without a mystery. Otherwise, this is what happens. So why was this not a Scooby-Doo movie? Because it never was. Did you notice the amount of characters in the Scooby-Doo movie that were not Scooby-Doo characters? Perhaps maybe half of the main cast or the main villain? Well, that's because they're not Scooby-Doo characters, they're Hanna-Barbera characters. That's right, Mystery Inc. was basically puppeteered into selling us a greater film narrative at the cost of an actual Scooby-Doo movie. So what happened? Well, when developing this film, there's a chance they could have been relying on the Wacky Races reboot to cue in newcomers on a slew of these characters. However, because that reboot was relegated to the Boomerang service and channel, the reboot really wasn't seen by that many people in the grand scheme of things, especially not the world stage audience that a giant animated blockbuster would have. So the lack of real context for most of these characters creates not just confusion, but disconnect and overall disinterest. Why do we care about Dick Dastardly? I've never seen him before up until now. They could have made a Hanna-Barbera crossover movie. I don't think it would have done as well. That's why they didn't market it as that. Half of this cast wasn't even in a ton of the promotional material. In fact, it was so pushed as a Scooby-Doo movie, I was caught off guard when there was other non-Scooby-Doo characters so prominently in the main cast. These characters are simply too obscure for the lack of explanation that they get and for the size of their roles in the movie. Non-Scooby-Doo characters should not have equal or more screen time as the main gang. It's one thing to have obscure characters, but Mystery Inc. are quite literally some of the most iconic characters in all of pop culture, period. Everybody in the movie, like Shaggy, acting like Blue Falcon was so huge just made it worse, and it felt overtly pushed onto the audience. They were all like, look, it's Blue Falcon, wow, Blue Falcon. And I'm sitting there like, who the fuck is Blue Falcon? I literally thought for a second, again, somebody who's not familiar with Hanna-Barbera, just wanted to see a Scooby-Doo movie, I thought he was a made-up character for the context of the universe of this movie. You can't have the main villain be somebody basically nobody the target audience would know, especially kids. Kids know Scooby-Doo, okay? Capitalism did its thing there, but they don't know most of the Hanna-Barbera characters. Maybe they're young and malleable enough to be introduced to them for the first time. Maybe that was their plan. In hindsight, as I say it out loud, it makes sense. But I feel like the film really did a bad job of introducing who these characters were, and they kind of just expected us to know who they were or to figure it out. Dick Dastardly had like no explanation, and even now after watching the movie, I still cannot tell you for the life of me who he is or why he did what he did. I guess he's just evil and wanted treasure. It's dumb. Look, if this movie was more Scooby-Doo centric, it would have been cool having Dick Dastardly as a small cameo villain or something like that. Like, they could have put him in the movie without making him dependent on the story. But it's clear, again, that they were not trying to tell a Scooby Doo story. I think it's cool trying to launch a Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe. I love a lot of Hanna-Barbera characters. I think it's time for them to come out of the obscure place that they're in and find a new audience with new kids. But I cannot stress enough, after the promotion of this movie and everything this movie was and stood for, I just was sitting there and I felt like I was lied to. I feel like I was like roped into watching something that I didn't actually want to watch. And that's very crucial because I don't think I'm alone in that aspect. Another huge problem: too many locations. This movie is all over the place. When you look at most Scooby-Doo films, they travel to a new destination, and the film is built around that destination. And so we got incredible films like Cyber Chase or Zombie Island. Even the live-action films follow this pretty closely. Monsters Unleashed is set almost entirely in Coolsville, which does not exist in this universe. I will get to that later. But this is one of the strongest things Scooby-Doo has going for it, because one new city or state offers a lot of scenery all on its own, and you really feel like you get to know a place after watching a Scooby-Doo movie set there. But Scoob can't commit to that, and instead tries to do a road trip, adventures on an aircraft, and even a venture to hell, which, when showcased, is really just a random, kind of scary looking area with as little background design as possible. We don't get to see a lot of it. This is a movie with an insane amount of locations that are constantly changing, some of them actually being real world locations like the Colosseum in Rome, but this movie had 0 common Scooby-Doo locations. Save for a boring fan service montage that showed us scenes we've already seen 1,000 times, there was no common Scooby-Doo locations in this entire movie. Part of me would have been totally fine with that. Reinvent the wheel a little bit. Have them go on a road trip around the country. I don't know, but keep it consistent and don't make half the fucking movie on Blue Falcon's stupid white ship with 0 design. It's just white. It looks like the alone room that Squidward is trapped in. What? They literally spent half this movie in Sportacus's blimp, and I am not okay with it. The fact that they dealt with the portal to hell too was so confusing and so far away from anything Scooby-Doo we've ever seen before that I literally could not believe that I was watching a Scooby-Doo movie I had fully accepted, I had transcended. Would you expect the climax of the Scooby-Doo movie to take place in Rome? Why was it Rome? Not to mention, and this is the thing that actually struck a chord with me the most, they don't live in Coolsville. Coolsville doesn't exist. They live in Venice Beach. Look, replacing the entire voice cast already made this whole thing feel way too Hollywood. Don't actually put them in Hollywood. It was like the most pretentious thing ever. The very last scene when they're opening up the Mystery Inc. offices right on Venice Beach, they wouldn't not live in Venice Beach. What are they, like, vlogging? What do you want them to do? Are they gonna, like, take their boosted board and get some boba tea? Oh, Fred's making TikToks. Is that what you want? Is that what you want to do to my baby? Speaking of the voice cast. The voice cast. This is the segment where I talk about how bad this is basically getting to the bottom of everything that's wrong with Scoob. This fully solidified that this is not a Scooby-Doo movie. This is a cheap Hollywood rendition of a classic franchise, hoping to rely on a very famous namesake to get people into theaters, but paying little to no respect to the original franchise itself. We've seen it before, and hopefully this shows studios that they can't keep pulling stuff like this without seeing backlash from the fans that made the franchise what it is today. The bottom line is, Scooby-Doo has had a very consistent voice cast for its entire run. In fact, most of the time, voice actors either retire or they die. The Scooby-Doo roles are sacred. That's why the voices are so magical and consistent, and you keep hearing the same voices throughout the many renditions of Scooby-Doo. I think that's a beautiful thing and something that I commend Scooby-Doo on greatly. It helps keep them feel all connected no matter how different they may be from each other. That's where this movie dropped the ball royally.
Oh, no disrespect to Will Forte, but I feel like it's very odd that there's a Scooby-Doo movie coming out without you as Shaggy. You are Shaggy. You've been Shaggy since Casey Kasem retired.
Yeah, about Scoob, I don't have a lot of good things to say. I wish them all well. Some of them are easier to accept than others when you don't get a job, but that was a bummer. I like playing the part. I like sort of having a legacy and a career that I've spent 30 years, of doing. And so I like the fact that I was that part, and it was a bummer that went a different way.
Yeah. What are you a daddy of?
Seeing the original voice actors, some of them tweeting about how they couldn't even watch the movie. This is heartbreaking stuff. I can't pretend to know behind the scenes stuff, okay? I don't know how this worked logistically, but in my mind, I feel like they definitely would have taken this role. So the fact that they didn't probably means they weren't offered it. And that becomes even more apparent when you look at the actual voice cast. I mean, Zac Efron is playing Fred. When would you ever pick Zac Efron to play Fred? Literally never. These don't even sound like the characters. It's clear that they relied on a celebrity cast because this is a Hollywood movie, and that's how it works in Hollywood. People will go because they recognize the celebrities. Which again, I go back to my original point. This is not a Scooby-Doo movie. It's too Hollywood. And this is not to diss the voice cast, who I actually believe did an incredible— Did you say IKEA? But it didn't work as a Scooby-Doo movie. I love Will Forte. He's a great actor. I love Last Man on Earth. I follow a lot of his stuff, but he's not Shaggy, no matter how hard he tries. Matthew Lillard is the true Shaggy, always and forever, and fans know that. You can't cheat them out of that. They recognize that the voice is different. You can't mess with stuff like that, especially with something as sacred as Scooby-Doo. We know these voices too well to change them at the last minute, expecting us not to notice. And Matthew Lillard was available, but they still went with a bigger Hollywood name. I swear to God, this ruined at least 25% of the movie for me, because Shaggy is arguably the biggest role, aside Scooby maybe, but a lot of his jokes didn't land because it seemed like the comedy was based off the fact that it was a Scooby-Doo character saying something very un-Scooby-Doo, like the IKEA line, or all the times they referenced Simon Cowell, which I know I sound like a broken record, but I'll get to him in a second. But it falls flat because it isn't Shaggy saying that. It's a Shaggy impersonation, one that, I'm sorry Will Forte, does not hit home for me. If you didn't think this movie shoehorn celebrities in enough. Simon Cowell is in the movie and he's a prominent role, and it's weird. To have him in is one thing, but Simon Cowell essentially sets up the entire conflict and divide within the gang, which I might add is completely unrealistic. It is weird to have a random celebrity in your movie, okay, but to make him crucial to the plot, I don't even know how to express how that makes me feel. It makes me feel really mad. It all starts with a meeting where Mr. Ink's like, we need to start making money, and Scooby and Shaggy are like, we're goofballs, we don't want to monetize the business, and then they get an investor, and it's Simon Cowell. Pause for laughter. But Simon Cowell completely disses Shaggy and Scooby, making them feel like they are not wanted, and they leave in a dramatic rush, even though nobody but Simon Cowell is being critical. In fact, the other three defend them and tell them not to go, but they leave anyways because the movie has to do that for some reason. This leads them getting picked up by Blue Falcon after a bowling scene. If you're lost, so was I. The problem is this movie is built on their quote fallout and Daphne, Fred, and Velma learning they still need Shaggy and Scooby, but it falls flat because their falling out was so underwhelming and unnecessary. It was impossible to feel like it was real at all. They never said for a second they didn't need Shaggy and Scooby. In fact, these three are barely a part of this movie at all. And again, having this all built on Simon Cowell, a real world celebrity who's, I'm being honest, not that relevant anymore, at least to Scooby Doo fans, was just weird and something that I didn't want or expect from a Scooby Doo movie. And if you're saying, well, okay, well, I understand his role, you know, Simon Cowell, it's a funny joke, haha, I will offer you this, maybe another route they could have taken. All of Mystery Inc. have parents. They're all established characters, and they could have all been used in this role. In fact, that would have been so much better because it would actually be true to the story and to the Scooby-Doo characters. Something that Mystery Inc. did incredibly well was showing all of Mystery Inc.'s family. It made them feel more grounded. It put a more realistic spin on the crazy concept of teens driving infinitely in a van solving mysteries everywhere. But instead, this movie took another opportunity to shoehorn in yet another celebrity. Are you sensing a pattern? One thing that's interesting about this film is the animation, and something I will praise it for. I will never be too critical of animation because I understand how hard animation is. It's painstaking labor of love, and anybody that successfully completes an animated project worked hard on it no matter what. And in a lot of places, Scoob looked absolutely beautiful, while others not as much. But what I really want to focus on here is the concept art. The concept art for Scoob is absolutely incredible. It's almost hard to look at because it's so great and hopeful. If you would have showed me this 3 years ago and said, we're gonna make this into a movie, I would have said, full speed ahead, you got this, homie. I would not have tied these two things together even remotely. It's not uncommon for concept art to be different from the final look of the film, but this concept art looked like they were having them go to more mystery locations, like the spooky castle here, or this creepy field of plants. It looked a lot more like a Scooby-Doo mystery movie. It even had better looking concept art of how Scooby and Shaggy met, having them sitting in a much more rural area as opposed to Venice Beach. Again, did they just look out the window when they were trying to figure out a location? This is the movie that I really would have wanted to see, keeping it to mostly Scooby-Doo characters and the famous mystery machine. It even looked a little bit scarier, which is something that I would have welcomed with open arms. A scary animated Scooby-Doo movie would have been incredible. This looked like a more balanced movie, where Blue Falcon was a welcomed addition, playing alongside of them instead of booting out half the main cast and taking over the story for a story that people would have overall cared less about. There's even that shark. Isn't that a Hanna-Barbera character? I'm gonna assume it is. It looks like how they could have done the movie right, and instead, we got something entirely different. So will it work? Well, I mean, Scoob is pretty much where I expected it to be in terms of reviews. As of recording this video, it's got like a 50% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's exactly what I thought. It's underwhelming. It's not overtly bad, okay? It's just disappointing. There's a lot of potential for a Scooby-Doo movie, and instead we got something that I would have never expected and something that I didn't entirely want. It's not laughably bad, okay? It's not something that's like it's so horrible you're questioning every second of it. It's just the idea that at the end of the day, they could have done so much more. But as sad as I am to admit it, I'm not really the target demographic here. It's really kids. Will kids like this? I feel like overall they will. It's a fun movie. I could potentially see a problem with them not knowing who a lot of these characters are, but kids are young and malleable. I don't know. Most might not even know who Scooby-Doo is well enough to be able to tell if this is a faithful rendition or not. And it is by all means a reboot and an origin story trying to jumpstart hopefully more Hanna-Barbera theatrical movies, if movie theaters survive, that is. I don't know what they're planning next. Maybe they were waiting to see how this movie turned out. I don't know. Either way, all I can say is I hope they learned from the mistakes of this one and continue to do what worked in this one, because as critical as I was and how angry I sounded, there was a lot about this movie that I really liked, that I thought was fun. I had a couple of laughs. I challenge you to watch Scoob and not have at least a little fun. But overall, this film felt, at risk of seeming dramatic, soullessly Hollywood. Everything from the cast to the locations to the film's agenda, I feel like my favorite animated gang was hijacked for an ulterior motive. But I'd love to know what you think. Did you see Scoob? Did you like it? Did you not? Let us know in those comments down below, or tweet to us at Roundtable Vids or me at @StretcherNemo. If you want to consider helping out the Roundtable, you can support us on Patreon or become a member of the channel and get exclusive access to scripts and avatars. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like, share it, and subscribe to the Roundtable for more incredible cartoon content. I'm Nemo, this is a Scoob review, and I will see you next time. Peace.